So before we get started in actually writing the sales letter and how to format the sales letter, I want to talk about identifying your prospect. And here's why. Your prospect is who you're going to be writing to. So you'll need to figure out who your prospect or who your audience is and how they think and how they react. I'll also talk about how to write with personality. And the third thing I'll talk about is what questions to ask the prospect. So what are things that you need to gather beforehand before you actually write the sales letter? So let's talk about identifying your prospect. There are a few things to keep in mind when you're writing your sales letter. First, you need to write it like you're writing a letter to your friend who, let's say, for example, you're in the bodybuilding niche and you're writing to a fellow bodybuilder about you found this great product, you got to write it to them. And don't be all formal. So things to look out for is don't be too formal, but you need to know who they are. How do they think and what are their greatest needs? And I'll move this to the bottom because that's more of a how to write type of deal. You also need to know that when you write a sales letter, to write it to the person. So try not to use I, try to use you a lot. Avoid using we, you all. You want to write the sales letter so that you're writing right directly to the prospect. You might not know who the prospect is, but you're writing dear fellow business owner or dear fellow bodybuilder, a solution for you, not you all, or we have a solution. Don't use we and don't use you all. Try to make it focus into you or I, and avoid using I unless you have to, but sometimes you might have to, but most of the time you can use you, and we'll show you how to do that. And now in this video series, before we actually show you more real life examples, I'm going to be showing you Edmund Lowe's Instant Covers pack. And we'll actually be using this specific sales letter as an example as we go through the actual video series. And to point out what I mentioned earlier about you, you'll notice he says you a lot. He says you, your. In rare cases, you notice that he'll use I doubt so or anything like that, especially when he's asking a question or engaging the reader to answer a question. So while you're trying to avoid using I, sometimes you can use it when you're interacting with the person directly. But most of the time you want to make it about them. So it's all about you, and you. So the second thing I want to talk about is writing with personality, or how to make it interesting. That would be a better way of saying it. So today I'm going to make you think a little opposite. We're going to think of things that make things not interesting. And we're going to create a list of those things, and I'm going to show you what makes things not interesting, because a lot of times people tell you things as it is, but they don't make you think about it, because a lot of times it's easier to think the negative and then reverse it to the positive later on. So if you're reading a sales letter or a letter, things that come to my mind are if it's boring, not friendly, too formal, not easygoing, too strict, too hypey. And this is probably a few of the reasons of why people actually get turned away after reading a letter or after reading an article, newspaper, whatever. Doesn't need to be a sales page. Now let's think about the opposite or the flip side of these being not interesting. So what's the opposite of boring? Exciting, friendly, informal. Informal being like you're writing to a friend. Easygoing, less hypey, but real. Because you got to remember one thing. People flock together. You've heard the saying, birds of a feather flock together. So if you're exciting, you're friendly, writer, informal, easygoing, less hypey but real, then people that are the same way will begin to flock to you. And at the same time, they're going to think, wow, this letter is exciting. And as they read down the headline, the body page, they want to read more. So you want to focus on making this more exciting, more friendly, easygoing, less hypey, but real. So when you do that, and it's probably common sense here, but we want to look at it just because it's very important. Now, sometimes the question is, how do you turn exciting, friendly, informal, easygoing, less hypey but real, and turn it into an actual sales letter? Let's go back and take a look at the sales letter here that we're looking at, and you'll notice that it's written as Dear Friend. Now, it might be a little bit formal, but as you get down to the actual sales letter, you want to make it less formal and make it easygoing. You want to engage the person by asking questions. As you can see here, at the top you have a headline. It's easy to see the headline, so it's easygoing. The way you make it easygoing and make it readable is by the format, which we'll be talking about later on. So make it easy to read but exciting at the same time, using exclamation marks, but you don't want to use too much so that you avoid becoming hypey. Hypey means that you're claiming too much, this and that. While it often works, some people get turned away from that. So the third question that you will want to ask is, what questions will your prospects ask that you should answer beforehand? So these are questions that you need to gather the answers to before you actually begin to write your sales letter. So here's a list of questions that you might want to ask yourself before you actually begin to write the sales letter. I provided a PDF file with these questions right below this video, so you can go ahead and download that, right click on the link and save the PDF file as. So the first question you want to ask is, why should your prospects buy from you? You can begin to explain what your prospects face, the problems they face, and that your product or service fulfills that needs. And other questions you might want to answer is, why should they trust you? How are you an expert in this area? And what is your credibility? So if you have any proof of that, testimonials actually work great for this. If testimonials say, so and so, I bought this product and it really helped me out, that would actually prove some of the credibility and some of the claims that you might be claiming in the sales letter. And we'll talk about testimonials later down the road. So the next question is, how can your product or service help solve their problems or their needs? That's one of the things that your prospect is going to be looking for in your sales letter. Oftentimes you can explain that in the headline itself, because you can address their problem, and then they're going to assume that, of course, their problems are going to be solved through your actual product or service. So that's probably one of the number one things that you want to address first, is within your headline and your sub-headline. And we'll talk about the headline and sub-headline later down the road. Also, you want to ask, why should they purchase your product or service? Why not your competition's? You're going to have competition that's going to be selling similar products or similar services. Why should they buy from you, and why should they not buy from your competition? So you want to separate that out and list out features and benefits, possible competitions that you have, and do a compare and contrast of your competition in comparison of your product. A lot of times, actually, that's what people use, is reviews. They'll review and they'll say, here's my competition and this is what I provide. The next question you want to ask is how your product is worth what you're asking for. If you're asking for $47 or $47 a month, it'd be good to show them what they're getting in comparison to probably your competition. Why should they pay for it? You're offering a cheap price, you're offering lots of content, you're over-delivering, they're getting more than their money, things like that. And then you want to ask, why should they buy it immediately and not wait? A lot of times people get down to the payment button. They think, well, I really don't need it now, I can wait later. But you want to create some sort of urgency, whether you're having only 500 copies sold, 200 copies sold, or they only get it for a certain amount of time, and that when that time passes, then they don't get it anymore. So you want to go ahead and answer these questions before we actually get on to the next video if you're writing your sales letter now. If you're not, don't worry about it, but go ahead and download that PDF so that you have it in hand before you actually write your sales letter.